We apologize for the delay. We'd now like to start the session. The topic for today is, also before that, welcome to day 2 of Bangalore Literature Festival. And okay, so the topic for today's panel is Keeping It Brief, the art of writing short stories. The panelists for today are Anjum Hassan, Susan Vishwanathan, Palash Mehrotra, Usha KR, Sanya, and Altaf Tayarwala. I'd now like to call upon the panelists on the stage. Has written Difficult Pleasures, Neti Neti, Lunatic in My Head, and the collection of poems Street on the Hill. She has contributed to many anthologies. She is also the book's editor at Caravan. Susan Vishwanathan is the author of Something Barely Remembered, The Visiting Moon, Phosphorus in Stone. She has also authored several sociological works, including The Christians of Kerala, History, Belief and Ritual, Interiority and Mysticism. She teaches sociology at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. Palash Krishna Mehrotra is the editor of Recess, the Penguin Book of School Days, and the author of Eunuch Park, 15 Stories of Love and Destruction. He writes a fortnightly column for Mail Today and is contributing editor at Rolling Stone, India. Usha KR began by writing short stories which were published in various Indian magazines and newspapers. Her short story, Sepia Tones, won the Katha Award for Creative Writing in English. She is the author of the novels Monkey Man, A Girl and a River, The Chosen. A Girl and a River won the Vodafone Crossword Award 2007. Monkey Man was shortlisted for the DSE Prize for South Asian Literature 2012. Sanya has been writing fiction in Marathi for many years and has published 14 short story collections, 3 novels, and 2 non-fictions, including a travelogue. She has many literary awards for her credit. Altaf Tayarwala has written No God in Sight, Ministry of Hurt Sentiments, and English. I'd now like the panelists to take over the session.
And thanks for being here at this early morning Saturday hour. Thank you, all the co-panelists, for being part of this session. Thanks. Yes, and I hereby officially demote myself to the navigator and not the moderator. So I hope there is less pressure on me now, and you all will all navigate your own ships. So since the title of the session is Keeping It Brief, how about each of us briefly gives a flavor of our themes, our works to this august audience, either by reading a really brief passage from one of our works or just describing what our works are about. If you would like to start, Anjum.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Yes, the last book that I published was a collection of short stories, which is the reason that I'm on this panel. And I'm going to read a little bit from a story called Good Housekeeping, which is both what it means, good housekeeping, but also the name, as many of you will know, of a very famous magazine. And this short story is about a relationship between a mother and a daughter. It's about domesticity. It's about a young woman trying to break away from her background in Bangalore and go into the larger world. And this little bit is from her journey to England to study literature. As soon as Ayana settled into her room on the university campus, she was hit by a very definite sorrow. It was so tangible she felt cheated. She felt as if something important had not been explained to her. Something in the very air of the country, in the water she drank, in the stones of the street. Once in a pub where she hung out with her housemates, she saw a solitary old man smiling and humming as he squeezed mint sauce from a Heinz sachet over his Sunday roast. The sight almost made her get up and leave, so acutely did she feel an unexplainable sadness. Another time she looked out of her room and saw the golden-haired Professor Butler, who taught Renaissance literature, smoking a cigarette by her car in the lot, her eyes screwed up in private thought, and the wind tearing at her. Then she got into the car and drove away. Ayana had to lie down and keep her teeth clamped on her lips. Among Ayana's teachers was Jagdeep Singh, a postgraduate research assistant who'd been on a PhD for a decade. He was a looming Punjabi guy. He looked like a mildly scruffier version of someone Ayana might see in a Delhi mall. The kind of person who towers above everyone and eyes every single woman while his girlfriend pretends not to notice. But everything changed when Jagdeep opened his mouth. He was hesitant and shy and British. Even his laughter was tentative, as if laughing at something, anything, was going too far. His respect for the writers whose work he analyzed bordered on awe. A look of guardedness came over him whenever anyone in class asked a question, which he would then proceed to answer with such acumen and gravity that the caution puzzled Ayana. What was it that he was afraid of revealing? Thanks.
Susan, please.
I'd like to talk to you about my work, Nelicinda. It was published by Rowley in 2012. I see it as a sequel to Something Barely Remembered, a collection of short stories which came out in 2000. I think Nelicinda is, for me, an interesting work because it begins with a novella, and that novella, in some senses, has to be seen as a long, short story. Minnie Krishnan is in the audience, so she knows that, in some senses, the space of the short story is that absolute abstraction. One doesn't know when it will begin and where it will end, but it has to end, and that is what defines it. So Nelicinda essentially works with the idea that if one is reading the Periplus, then the idea that the Greeks and the Romans certainly knew about villages in Kerala, coasts and ports and harbors where they could exchange gold for pepper. This is the central axiom of this work. So I presume then that if one looks at 3rd century Apocrypha about the life of St. Thomas, then in some senses the questions of how we look at legends and myths, how we look at narratives about dominant or powerful families, how we understand that these can be used as allegories even today for understanding the question of servitude and slavery. So the novella, which is a long short story, is essentially about servitude. It's about the way in which the complicity that exists between the patrons and the workers is redefined in terms of modernity, in terms of contemporary spaces, in terms of the way we understand that these hierarchies have never really gone away. The short stories complement the novella essentially because they are very, very austere and they reflect on the Syrian Christian and Nair diaspora and the ways in which diaspora communities in the 21st century rework these legends as they have appeared over perhaps 1700, if not 2000 years. So that is what I would like to say about Nelson.
Thank you, Susan. Usha, before we proceed, would we like to, I think it's a very nice, important distinction. How do you differentiate between the novella and the short story? How many pages should a short story be for it to be qualified as a novella? And can the short story also contain multiple perspectives and an entire world that often we expect a novel to present to us?
I don't think we can be prescriptive about it, but from a publisher's point of view, I know that they require a minimum of 80,000 words for a work to qualify as a novel. But one thing about the short story is it is such a malleable form. You can, it transmutes itself in so many different ways. You have, this is something, if you take the spectrum of the short story, you have on one side what Kingsley Amis said is his kind of short story. That is that which bears a very close affinity to the novel, not in terms of scale, but in terms of the proportions, the internal proportions that things like aspects such as narrative, description, dialogue, building of the character, building up to a climax, and then the resolution. So it is a kind of mini novel, so to say. And as you proceed along the spectrum, you have V.S. Pritchett's short story as something glimpsed out of the corner of your eye, something in passing. But the author, the short story writer, brings to bear the clarity of his vision, the precision of his observation, and character making into this something that he glimpses out of the corner of his eye. Another thing is, I think you can't decide, the experience suggests the form that you are going to write in. You can't decide that, okay, I have 5 days or 1 month or 1 year, so I'm going to write a short story or a novella. It is the nature of the experience that you are going to narrate or what you're going to say, and it suggests itself to you. And we have, all of us on this panel, from what I know of what we have written, you yourself have very, very short stories which you've put together in the form of a novella.
Which I passed off as a novel, yes.
Which is a novel. And Anjum, I know that they're very intense, luminous moments that she has in her novels. So this is...
It's a very important statement that you made, that it is the experience that calls forth the form. And given the revival of the short story, not only in the published form but also online, Amazon has these short bursts of reading which they offer for download, and also these various websites which offer you concept fiction, experimental fiction, often just a paragraph. Flash fiction has also gained momentum. Yes. So I'm wondering that is it just a reflection of the ruptured lives that we live, lives that don't really follow a fixed arc, that are continuously interrupted and taken into completely new directions repeatedly, and that is where the short story is therefore now becoming the form of the times. I'd like each of us to kind of weigh in on it, if possible.
I don't think it's a reflection of anything, because story is just a story. It's about words, it's about sentences, and it's just how one approaches it. It's obviously a different approach from a novel. But I don't think it's a... And I also disagree. I mean, one is about sentences and words. It's not a reflection of anything. And I still don't think it's become a very accepted form. Once in a while someone wins a prize and talk about that the story is back. But the story is, well, it's always been there. But publishers don't like the short story, and everyone knows that. So... and America takes it seriously. In England, if you write a short, I mean, you're not taken seriously. It's a very strange business being a short story writer. So one, I don't think it reflects anything apart from it's just sentences and words. And two, I just feel that it's, I don't think it's enjoying any kind of revival and as for flash fiction, I mean, short stories have been, people have written one-page stories, a paragraph can be a story. Heart of Darkness, Conrad, that was originally written as a long short story, then published as a slim novel. So yeah, there are no rules to the story. I don't know if that, yeah.
I suppose the story was always there. Everyone likes to hear a story. So stories were always there. They were oral tradition, and I think I write in Marathi. And Marathi literature has a very rich heritage of short story writing. So for me, story is something about, maybe about an experience, maybe about a people, maybe about something. It's like catching a glimpse through a small window or a skylight. And it tells quite a bit about that experience, about that particular story. So there may be a story, there may not be a story. It's very fluid. And I think it's very, very challenging. From where I come, my language, I think there have been always very good short story writers. And I've been quite influenced by them. And I like the form of short story. And it is always very challenging to put something into that framework. So in that sense, I think short story it opens up into something else. And there is something not said also in the short story. You know, some silences, which I find very, very challenging, very demanding, and it's delightful even for readers to see those silences.
Sanya, why don't you tell us a little bit about your works or read briefly from your work, and then we'll go back to Usha.
Okay. As I said, I write in Marathi. This story was translated by Kirti Ramchandra. This story was essentially about a relationship between a father and a daughter. And it's daughter who he realizes he hardly knows since she has grown up into a young woman. So name of the story was Premache Januk. That is actually love gene. Your mother, he stammered. What did she do on your birthday? When I was a little girl, she used to have a party, buy me a surprise gift, and keep it next to my pillow before I woke up. She paused. Do you know what I gave her for her birthday? A sapling. Many of the plants in our garden are those birthday gifts. She loved gardening. We had planned that someday we would buy a big plot of land and have lots and lots of trees. I insisted that we have a shelter for animals too. Everything and everybody there would be infected by the love gene. The place would be filled with love. We hoped that it would be passed on, far and wide. But none of that happened. Dreams rarely translate into reality, do they? As she spoke, her eyes filled with tears. As usual, the father was completely nonplussed. What was she talking about? It made no sense to him. She went in and got him a glass of water. He gulped it down. He struggled with the words. What were you saying about that love gene or something? She stared at him for a long time. He too kept on looking at her, a strange woman, his daughter, grown up now, born this day many years ago. How many? How little he knew about her. She started to explain. It's a science, genetics. A person's essence is contained in the genes. It's passed on to the next generation. Love too is like that. If you have the love gene, you have love in your heart. If not, rubbish. I haven't read anything like that, he snapped. Really? Well, you couldn't possibly have read about everything, could you? Moreover, what's unfamiliar today will become known tomorrow. He became nervous. The strength seemed to drain out of him. You probably don't have it, she continued. I must have inherited from my mother. It's not found in everyone. Only when it becomes universal will the world change. But it's a slow, gradual process. We must keep trying. Tough to multiply it. He felt completely exhausted. With difficulty, he muttered, I remembered your birthday this morning. A half smile played on her lips. Did she believe him? Who knows? He had not known what to gift her, not even what to say to her. He just sat there with a defeated air about him. A long time passed. Neither of them spoke.
Usha, would you like to tell us something about your works, please?
I have a bit from a short story, which
Please.
I'd like to read. And what this, the piece I chose has to do with the detail in a short story. According to a critic, I think Nirmal Verma, the Hindi short story writer, he says, distinguishing between a short story and a novel, he said that in a novel, events flow in the tide of time, and the details are accretive. You know, there's a cumulative effect at the end of the novel. Whereas in a short story, details are, they are like, they are individual moments, and they are static, and they pulse with an energy and a nervous tension of their own. Each detail means something. So when I was looking at a short story that I had written, I thought of Nirmal Verma's, this distinction about the accumulation of detail, and I'd just like to read a little bit. It is from a short story called Boy to Chase the Crows Away, and the setting is a young woman hears from her old college mate or classmate, and unexpectedly, and she is setting out to meet her. So using detail to build up mood and anticipation, leading the reader up to what is going to happen. Turn right at the tram tracks. She looked up at the obliging rumble of the tram and its high-pitched swish as it cut across and disappeared. Walk slowly, she told herself. There's no hurry. It was 10 in the morning and quite hot already. She could see nobody else on the footpath. The heat rose from her body, bringing up the fragrance of her own talcum powder. She was glad of her first time starched cotton sari, noting that it approximated so well the yellow of the shower of gold under which she was walking. There was a steady stream of vehicles on the road, distanced in a world of their own. The footpath, broad, even, and paved, was easy, and she liked walking. The sky above was crisp and blue. The day held promise. To her left were high compound walls, like the walls of fortresses, successfully sealing off the houses, shrouding in mystery those who lived in them and went about their business, oblivious of faintly curious girls who walked past their shut gates. On a stool at the gate sat the Darwan. Every house had one. He seemed to be as mandatory as the gate itself. Now he sat slumped and indifferent, or alive to every little distraction, eyes flickering with interest as she walked by. A gate opened and she came to a halt. The Darwan clicked his heels smartly and a white car sailed out. She was a little disappointed at not seeing who was within. A woman with voluptuous shoulders, the ayah to be sure, came to the gate and started talking animatedly to the Darwan. She turned right at the tram tracks. Now the footpath became narrow, so narrow that the bougainvillea on the compound walls scraped against her. Besides, there were many others on the footpath. Her brief spell of solitude was over. Still, there was a school on her right. She could see the children in red and white checked uniforms playing in the yard. Orange geraniums grew in empty battery cases in front of a motor mechanic shop. A cat stretched itself on the zinc sheet roof. It was a spillover of yesterday's mood, she knew. When Ghoshal Babu said there was a phone call for her, she was surprised. No, not from home, Ghoshal Babu said unerringly, his eyes flashing sideways. Shipra's voice on the other end was so unexpected that for a moment she stood transfixed, oblivious of the strong smell of phenyl from the toilets close by, of Ghoshal Babu nestling at her elbow, almost. When shall we meet, Shipra said. Tomorrow. Tomorrow? Why not? And so it had been. She had given Ghoshal Babu a dazzling smile, feeling acutely his disappointment that her caller had not been a man, and written out an application for leave for the following day.
Before we proceed, Palash, Anjum, you also write novels. You also write literary criticism for Caravan magazine. How does that work? How does the short story writing fit in with the other forms of writing that you do? And then I'd also like to have the same question for Susan, since you're an academician and you teach. I'd like to also kind of explore that. How do you, what frame of mind do you occupy when you are writing a short story or fiction? So Anjum, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, that's a familiar question. I get asked that question a lot. And I think ultimately it's about your interests and concerns as a writer. And the forms become instrumental in a way. Because those concerns, those interests, those observations, those things you pick out about life, they remain the same. It's just that the short story, I think, is the tip of the iceberg. And with the novel, you're hacking out a bit more of the iceberg. But it's still the iceberg, and there's still a lot that's going to be submerged. I think both my fiction and my short fiction and my longer fiction is about the solitary individual in the city, is about a kind of a search that is partly to do with place, where do I belong, which city should I live in, partly to do with relationships, partly to do with identity, modern Indian identity. Do I fit in 21st century India? Do I fit in India Shining? So those concerns you can see in Difficult Pleasures, you can see in Neti Neti, you can see in the guy sitting and listening Pink Floyd and smoking a joint in Lunatic in My Head. So yeah, so it's not so important to me whether I'm writing a novel or a short story. It's just that with the short stories, I can daydream about many more lives and many more people. And that's what my fiction is. It's about daydreaming about other people's lives. And there are just that many more people in the stories, and fewer people, but deeper investigations in the novels. And I just want to comment quickly on what Palash was saying earlier about the publishing scenario. And I think it's true that short stories are not big time, and I think the novel still dominates. But it's also the case that it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy when we write short stories, that we're giving ourselves this corner in the literary world, that we write these little things that are not, as important as the novel. So sometimes I wonder if we do ourselves a disservice as short story writers. So that's important too. But the other point is the cultural, which is that, like Sania said, in Indian languages, short stories have always been hugely important. And when we talk about the career, the fate of the short story, we're actually only talking about Indian English, which has not had a very, very good record with the short story. But in the languages, modern literature in Urdu, in Hindi, in Bengali, in Marathi, in Malayalam, in Tamil was all through short fiction. And that was a reaction to, it was definitely a reaction to some idea of very, very conventional classical literature. And the reaction was in the form of this fragmented, modernist, brief form, which was about a person or a family. So I think that to me is really still exciting, that you're able to write in this modernist way about modern individuals in the short story, like Palash said, Joseph Conrad, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf. Their novels are like short stories. So you also have to remember that some novels are like short stories and some short stories are like novels. So we don't necessarily need to tie ourselves down to the genre per se. Yeah. So.
Thank you for that question, because I think Levi-Strauss has an essay on miniaturization. So that essay on miniaturization in a collection is extremely interesting, because it looks at the ways in which, when you look at something in detail, then the world leaps up at you. So the fragment becomes interesting. And Anjum used the idea of the iceberg. I would use the idea of distillation. So for me, a short story should distill something. So it requires a particular frame of mind. In a way, it's like writing poetry, which I don't do much. I write a little. But the essence of that kind of work is that you can't really lie. So the austerity of it, the frugality of it, it's demanding. I think it's demanding because it needs a mind which is completely empty. So I'm a classroom teacher, so my life is centered around that. And the sociology which I write is also geared towards classroom teaching. So I'm fortunate to be in a research university. So I hope the UGC doesn't slam us with a one university, one window, one admission policy, one syllabus. That is what I hear that the Modi government wants to do. It would be disastrous. So in some senses, I think the creativity of the short story writer rests essentially on being understood as having that space which is all their own. And it's not a judgmental world. So the fact that we're not published, perhaps, I mean, I know that Rowley did tell me that short stories don't sell, so they don't want another collection of short stories from me. So they were very clear about it. I think they have a policy. I think they need to make ends meet, pay their editors, whatever else it takes. So we are only receiving 10%. The 90% goes into keeping their establishments and their structures. I'm being generous about it, obviously, because as writers, we are not putting any pressure on our publishers. But it's a very real world out there, and short story writers exist regardless of whether they're published or not published.
But the avenues for publication have increased a lot. And I also often find that our short stories often travel much further than a novel. I know writers who've published short stories on online magazines, and suddenly that short story has been picked up to be included in some academic anthology. So, while a novel exists as this voluminous and this grave body of work, the short story is a slippery little thing, and it can land up in any platform. It can be repurposed repeatedly for different uses. And I find that very exciting. Palash, you know, you've written Yunak Pak, which was about contemporary India and the youth, in a sense, the experience of being young in India in this. So why don't you either read or also talk about it a little bit here?
No, thanks. Thanks. No, since we were talking about, I'll just read a couple of pages. But inevitably, we end up, especially in English, we end up talking about the short story and the novel. Just a couple of thoughts about that. You know, one, Hollywood loves short stories. A lot of movies are not based on novels, but on stories. Which was that one about the two homosexual cowboys? Brokeback Mountain. You know, there are many. And they're all, you know, full-length feature films, 10-page stories. Another difference between a novel and the short story is also, you know, sometimes when I write a story, I chase a sentence. It's a bit like what Raymond Carver said. A line popped into his head, which was, Tom was vacuuming the carpet when the telephone rang. And then, you know, he was stuck with this line, and he started chasing this line, and then that became a story. So that's, you know, I don't think novels are written like that, you know. When you write a novel, you make a plan, then you execute that plan. But with stories, you can just chase a sentence and you know. So that's another, you know, just a thought. Yeah. Okay, let me read a couple of pages from the story called Nick of Time, which is about this undergraduate boy in Oxford. So he meets this girl, then he takes her to his hall of residence, and then he's just drinking, and the girl gets bored, and she goes to sleep. And then this boy is still up, and he's drinking, and then something happens. So yeah. Yeah. So yeah, she's gone to sleep, he's watching TV and drinking. Mayank sat watching telly till late. He was careful not to turn the volume up too high. Swati had turned her back to him and the telly and gone to sleep. As far as Mayank could tell, she seemed comfortable, oblivious of her surroundings. He had finished the bottle of wine and was now drinking a can of Holsten Pilsner that he had found in the shared fridge in the kitchen outside. The Holsten did not belong to him. Was it a crime to consume a beer that belonged to somebody else? Mayank sipped on the beer and thought hard. He was going to replace it tomorrow first thing. That is, if he managed to get up at all. He was aware that tomorrow first thing might very well not arrive before tomorrow evening. He knew it was late because they were showing Naked Elvis on Channel 4. The show began with a man dressed up as Elvis. As the show progressed, Elvis gradually lost all his Elvisness apart from his shades and stick-on sideburns. The last segment featured him butt naked, grinding his hips, his limp manhood dangling precariously between his thighs. As soon as the show finished, Mayank felt sick. He needed to throw up immediately. The reasons for his feeling nauseous were not clear. Was it the sight of the male organ swinging like an emergency chain in an Indian railway compartment? Or was it just that he had too much to drink? He stumbled towards the vanity unit in the corner of the room, barely managing to reach it in time. He flung the door open, pulled the cord switch, leaned forward and aimed straight for the drain hole. A full 10 minutes after bathing, Mayank stood in front of the mirror, his hands resting on the edge of the basin. His calm, untouched self sat regally on a throne like a benign Raja, calmly observing and calculating the damages inflicted on his body, the bloodshot eyes, the runny nose, the burning in the solar plexus, the taste of sour vomit in the mouth. This calm self also noticed something else that wasn't part of his body. A small pouch stuffed with things lay on the flat top that surrounded the basin. The zipper was shut, except for a small opening at one end. The oversized head of a toothbrush emerged ominously from this opening, like a naughty baby snake that wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. It was as if the snake had tried to slither out of the pouch and make a getaway, then changed its mind at the last minute when it realized that the world was a hostile place, where snakes with poison in their fangs were feared, but baby snakes, no matter how prickly their bristles, were dismissed as mere toothbrushes. The pouch belonged to Swati. She had taken it out of a handbag because she wanted to brush her teeth before she went to bed. Mayank now unzipped it. He was thrilled to discover that it was full of her makeup stuff. Mayank turned around to check on Swati. She still had her back towards him. Thank God for that. He could see her shoulders in all their bare and bony glory. Her knee-length off-shoulder black dress lay abandoned on the carpet. Mayank tried but failed to resist temptation. He undressed, slipped into the black dress. It was not easy, but he managed. He remembered an old college friend telling him about how she had dressed her boyfriend up in a sari once and discovered she found him sexiest that way. Mayank felt insanely sexy in the smoky black dress. He'd harbored a secret crush on this friend for many years before she disappeared into sunny California with a sari-clad partner. He wished she could see him now. Next, he took out Swati's mascara. He drew black circles around his eyes, rock and roll style, as if he was going to a Kiss concert. Satisfied with the effect he had achieved, he replaced it, fished out a stick of reddish-brown lip gloss. This he applied carefully, correctly, with the practiced ease of a receptionist, used to touching up her lips every half hour or so. He took off the tiny button earrings he was wearing and replaced them with long mango-shaped ones that swayed merrily, juicily, each time he shook his head. There were more discoveries along the way, like the clip-on nose ring, which he happily clamped to his right nostril. Now he felt like a vamp in a Hindi soap. He tried to get into her stilettos, but they were too small for him. Disappointed, but not wanting to accept defeat, he returned to the magical pouch that seemed to contain just about everything he would require on a desert island, an island where he could do whatever he felt like without fear of censure or ridicule. Just 2 more paragraphs, is that okay? A chunky bracelet of oxidized metal caught his eye. Extricating this bracelet was a delicate operation that involved disentangling it from various other pieces of jewelry floating around in the pouch, rings, necklaces, thin silver bangles. Every once in a while, Swati would turn around and change her position, but her eyes remained firmly shut. If she had seen him, she was certainly not saying anything. Initially, Mayank felt jittery each time she moved, but by now he was far too happy, too far gone, to care. Mayank felt giggly. He surveyed himself in the mirror and fell in love with what he saw. His overarching distant self congratulated itself at having wrought such heavenly transformation on both face and body. He walked up and down the room, swaying his hips. Instead of pulling his shoulders back, he let them hunch forward. He raised his warm left shoulder and brought it to his cheek. He drew his forearms up so that they were at right angles to his biceps, then let the wrists drop limp. He went back to the mirror. He worshipped what he saw.
So I've been told we've almost run out of time, and that was a good note to end on. Is there anything we would like to add? Any last notes? Last comments? So can I open it for Q&A? Please, we invite questions from the audience. We will start pointing people out. Yes.
Or great do you think is the self-publishing industry in India, and do you see it growing anytime soon?
I have found that the autonomous industry is doing really well. So that's interesting for me because no longer is it seen as desktop publishing. It comes with a lot of difficulties. I've had to look at 7 drafts of a book which went into press in 2012. It came back as reading Marx, Weber, and Durkheim today. It's brought out by a very small unit. But the paper is good, the print is large, and is made to last. And whatever errors there are, well, I think even if one publishes with a multinational house with lots of copy editors, there are still books which have errors in them. We have experience of it. So I think it's here to stay, and I'm really glad because I think that multinational publishing has really coerced authors. I'm speaking as a social scientist. The gatekeepers are major. Fiction writing, I'm sure, is the same. So, I mean, all power to all houses wherever they are.
Thank you.
But do you think self-publication will have shaken off its sense of disrepute in a way that it is often also considered vanity publication?
Self-publication would presume that the author is putting in money, so that's a difference. And of course, the distinction between printing and publishing will always be there. But I think that independent houses have communicated over and over again. Feminist publishing houses have done very well for themselves. So I think there is a market. And Indians are great readers, and they like the tactile experience of books. So e-publishing, e-universities, e-course materials, that is still elitist in some senses. Of course, if the government is cutting down on education in the budget, and it has done that majorly, then the idea that there is an intelligentsia of the people who will be able to read, whether net versions or hard copies, I think it's a new problem, and we have to think about it, because the basic assumption is that reading and learning will remain with what are called the twice born, wherever they are, or however mobile they may be. So it is a very, very great problem, and I think independent publishing will help in terms of the questions of popularizing books or making materials available. Flipkart doesn't make a distinction between independent publishers and multinational publishers. Multinational publishers are representative of colonialism, but after independence, the Indians have always communicated that they want stakes in whatever it is. So it's never that it is a pure form of colonialism. I mean, we've always held hands with colonizing agents. Interior colonialism has its own representatives. I mean, so when one looks at the ways in which varieties of fundamentalism have appeared, the intelligentsia, the upper class has always held hands with whoever is in control. So I don't think that there's going to be any difference in that, whether it happened 100 years ago, whether it happens now. But what is interesting is that there is, in the Paulo Freire sense of the word, there is a new generation, and that generation does want to read and learn, and I think books are the way that they do it.
My name is Sujata Rajpal, and I have come from Mysore. This is the first time I'm attending any literary festival, and I am feeling very excited. This question is for any one of you. What suggestion will you give to a new short story writers? There is no sentence to chase, there is no idea in mind, there is no thought in mind, but only what you have is only a deadline to meet. How to go about it?
Question. I always look at it that stories are happening all around us. And even in our mind, we continuously keep on looking at stories, experiencing stories. There is something in our mind. We observe. We just take it in. Only thing is, when you put it in words, when you make something out of it, we need to put ourselves into it, our own imagination into it. Short story is not something just, this has happened and I just go on writing it verbatim. That doesn't make a short story. Because I personally feel there are always some spaces in short stories where you say something, but you say much more there. That's what I was talking about, the silences and the unsaid spaces. So once you catch that, once you know that, this is what I want to say, but you need not say it in so many words. You just put it, use it. In Marathi, we use the word pratibha. I don't know, I'm sure all of you perhaps understand. So it is not just what is happening, this is what I experience, I put it in words. We use our pratibha into it and make experience into a short story.
I think you should write a short story about having to write a short story and not having any ideas and having to meet a deadline. But the other thing that can be interesting when you're stuck is to give yourself a challenge. And there are different ways of doing it. There was this French movement, literary movement called the Oulipo, and they would write without vowels. So you can use any words you like, but there should not be any vowels, or there should not be any but you choose a particular alphabet and say, this story is going to be written without the alphabet G. So give yourself some kind of a challenge like that, or something that will tie yourself up in chains and then try to free yourself, and in the process, you'll get a story.
No, I also agree with you that in a story, I think what you leave out is very crucial. I mean, in a novel, you throw everything into the novel, whereas in a story, you leave out, and it's leaving things out takes a long time. So, a lot of time you won't be doing very much, but, deciding what to leave out. And I think it's, if you look at a novelist writing a story, novelists between novels like Updike or Ishiguro, I think it's very obvious to a natural short story writer that this is a novelist writing stories, because a novelist will just put too much in. And it's not that a story can't be very detailed, but you can spot it because, say, a novelist will put too much of the backstory in. So when Updike is writing a story between novels, he'll put where this character's parents came from, where this character was born, whereas, you don't really need to put all that in a story. In fact, you can just you zero in on a character and that situation, and you don't have to worry about what happened before and afterwards. So anyway, that's another, yeah.
I'd like to ask a question.
One more last one. Sure. One last question.
In a collection of short stories, now it often happens that one short story becomes a novella, and the others are short, but some become a little more bigger. Now I want to know how many, like novella, as you said, could be in a collection of short stories, or it should be. I mean, everything has to be brief.
I think it depends on, you could consult your publisher or your editor and then take it forward. From what I understand, there are no hard and fast rules. But one would expect that whether it's, even if it is a short story collection, there would be a certain proportion and a certain unity, either a unity of theme, where you're writing about the urban experience, or in the sense if you have one short story which is, say, a page long or 2 pages, and one which is a novella, I wouldn't say that it wouldn't work, but you would enter into the realm of how you're going to put it out in the public space. That is what I think. Anyone?
I think what constitutes the short story essentially is a riddle. So once you've answered that riddle, the puzzle within the short story, and the length of time or the length of pages or words you need to, I think that decides it. So it's really what that riddle is. Once you've solved it, the story's over. So the length shouldn't worry you at all, and the publisher would decide on what the sum total of the book would be. So I think if one looks at Virginia Woolf or Chekhov or Hans Suin, they're all working with both forms comfortably, and there isn't really a distinction.
Thank you.
There was one more question. One last question.
Yeah. So when you're writing a book of short stories, especially in first person, how do you, I mean, is there something you do to ensure that 2 or 3 stories don't sound like the same person, because you're writing in first person again and again and again? And if all of them are men, or, you know, there is a chance that it might sound like the same person experiencing 2 separate stories. Also, is it common to have a book of short stories where one story is written in first person, another one is written in third person limited, and you know, you have a combination of those?
No, just a simple point. I think it doesn't really matter whether you write in the first person or the third person. I mean, the thing with the story is you have to find a voice for every story, and that's very crucial. So, you know, and if you know, and that takes time. So once you find a voice for the story, you know, whether you write in the first person or, it doesn't really matter. You can write all the stories in first person. But, you know, that's the tricky thing. You have to find a voice for every story, and that's what distinguishes one from the other, you know. So.
And while I agree with that, I also think, you know, finding a voice can also then take you into the territory of gimmick, where you need to then, you know, try to create narrative tics to differentiate voice upon voice. So I think if you've created the milieu strongly enough, and if you've put your character in a situation of deep interest and of something that is genuinely a dilemma of some sort, that will automatically differentiate the stories, and you don't have to actually really worry about the superficial aspects of the voice and the narrator sounding different from the other. Yeah.
I think if you're starting out as a short story writer, I would advise you not to write in the first person, because then the tendency would be to write very closely from your own experience. So it's always a good exercise to actually write in the third person about someone who's very different from you. And having said that, I don't see a reason for anyone to write stories unless they're interested in other people, unless there's curiosity. So if that curiosity is missing and you're worried about sounding like yourself or sounding similar or ending up writing about the same kind of person, then maybe you should find another job.
Nausgard writes about himself.
That's not fiction. Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds. Yeah, Palash is talking about the Norwegian writer Knausgård, Ove Knausgård, who's very celebrated right now because he wrote the most painfully boring details about his life and made it into like a 5-volume series of book that has made him super famous. So that's one way to go. But then you have to make an art out of being self-indulgent. He made an art about his family might be suing him, I'm not sure. So what I'm trying to say is that whatever you do, you have to make an art out of it. So if you want to write about yourself, that's cool, but then make an art out of it and be Knausgård.
So that was a wonderful session. I would now like I would request the panelists to please sign the signboard behind. The BLF is not simply about the written word. We have at the festival a wonderful showcase of contemporary art and sculpture. Bangalore Literature Festival, in association with our venue and hospitality partner, Crown Plaza Bengaluru, proudly presents Forms, Faces, Forces, an exhibition celebrating motifs and emotions that books bring alive. Curated and conceptualized by Gallery G, the exhibition is on at the Crown Plaza Hotel lobby as well as in the festival area. Thank you, and please be seated. The next session will start shortly.